The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. WNSB, in conjunction with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, has partnered with WHRO TV and also PBS in debuting the Henry Louis Gates Sr. documentary, The Black Church. Join us here right now for Save the Water as we go to part 2 of our local discussion about the Black Church. And in the second half hour, we'll discuss the acquittal of former President Donald J. Trump. Where do we go from here? You're listening to Save the Water. I'm your award-winning host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to Save the Water. I'm your award-winning host, Dr. Eric Claville. We thank you for joining us here on this Sunday morning. And it is Valentine's Day. I don't want that to leave us. So happy Valentine's Day out there to everyone who's in love. Continue to love each other, because one thing we know that this world is in the need of is more love. So we honor all the couples, all the love out there that's being shared. We're excited to bring you part 2 of our discussion here on Save the Water, where we discussed the Black Church. If you remember last week, we spoke with a local pastor, Pastor Chris Carter, there in Newport News, Virginia, who also owns Carter Funeral Home. And we're crossing over into the other side of of Hampton Roads, across the bridge, as we say here in Norfolk, to bring you Bishop Courtney McBath. He is pastor and leader of Calvary Revival Church in Norfolk. Bishop Courtney McBath, welcome to Save the Water.
Hey, it's great to be with you, sir. Thank you for having me, and just looking forward to my conversation with you today.
Well, look, again, as I say to all pastors that come and join us on a Sunday, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time. We know that you are shepherds of the flock that God's giving you, and Sundays are fairly busy. So again, I just want to thank you so much for giving a bit of your time to talk about this very important topic, the Black Church. You know, before we delve into it, I want to kind of talk about this documentary that Henry Louis Gates Sr. is doing. He's a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal storyteller. He'll go down in history as one of the great storytellers of African American and Black history in our country. And when I heard that he was doing this documentary about the Black Church, I was more than excited, because the church itself has been a part of my life and my family's life, as we would say in the old church, while I was yet in the womb. You know, I was in church, with my mother, with my father, and of course, it's part of our life today with my family and the like. But the Black church itself means so much, not just to African Americans, not just to America, but really the world. But I'd like to talk about a little bit about yourself and Calvary Revival Church here in Norfolk. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, CRC is approximately 31 years old. Came here as a 30-year-old myself to plant the church. My wife Janine and I, and God's been very gracious to us. We were able to lead some wonderful people and a wonderful staff, wonderful team, and we're able to meet needs in the community, which is the most exciting thing for us. We have the opportunity not only to share truth on weekends, but we also have the opportunity to reach out to folks. The pandemic, as difficult as it has been for our people, and when I say our people, I'm not referring to our church, but to our people as a community. As difficult as this time has been, we have seen the need to collaborate. And when we could not gather for church, we could turn our church into a blood donation center, or a COVID testing center, or a place for people to get food. 2,000 people a week sometimes come to get food. So where we're not able to feed people in person spiritually, we can do it. We can do it in the natural. Right. So our church has a heart for community, for Norfolk and the surrounding region, and that's been our heartbeat since the beginning. And so this conversation with you is an exciting one, because I like the entire discussion of what is the impact that the Black church has had on our community, but more importantly, what is the potential of that impact? What could we do even beyond what we've already what we've already done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As you were describing, what your church has been engaged in, your ministry, I think about the Salvation Army motto, heart to God, hand to man. And really, that's the way it should be as we're living in this country. And you mentioned the pandemic, and not just the pandemic, but as African Americans, we've gone through a lot. And the church has really been that staple for us. But we know that you just didn't stumble into this ministry that you have in Norfolk that's really impacting across our region and the world. But there was a start. Tell us about how you got your start in church and the impact of the church on you, just personally.
I was raised in church. I've been in church all my life. The joke is often told. When I was young, I had a drug habit. My mother drugged me to church on Sunday. She drugged me to church on Sunday night. She drugged me to church on Wednesday. Don't
forget about Tuesday night Bible study.
Mom
now.
had us in church, and that was the beginning of my life, learning the Bible, to read, and all those things that I learned, how to memorize, and all those things. A lot of that came from my training in church. Started in church. I started preaching at 13. And then started officially in ministry at 17. So always, my entire life, all I remember is church. We ate at church. We made friends at church. We you name it, it happened at church. We got put in time out. And, I'm saying that figuratively, not literally. We got in trouble at church. And so church has shaped my life. It has shaped my ideas about life, about the world. It shaped my ideas about my responsibility to help others. It's shaped me economically, politically. I learned how to be a good husband at church. I learned how to be a good father at church. I learned how to be a good steward over finances at church.
Wow.
So there is no area of my life that has not been impacted by the Black church. It is my life. It's my basis. It was my college. It was my everything. And I'm so grateful that God put me there.
Absolutely.
And I've remained there until now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of us have that same story. That drug habit was being drugged to the church. You mentioned Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, but you forgot about Friday night. You forgot about choir rehearsal. You forgot about, youth service.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that we stayed all day Sunday. We went at 9 in the morning. We came home at 9 at night.
Absolutely. And look, I didn't mind staying all day because, listen, so some of the best cooks.
Food was coming.
Come on now.
I knew you were about to say it, brother.
Look, some of the best cooks I've ever seen and food that I've tasted came out of our church and other churches around. I remember, and I'm just going to give a quick 15-second memory here. We had one mother of the church, she would cook dressing. And let me tell you, everybody loved her dressing. And even at her funeral, her dressing was mentioned. That we're going to miss her, but we're going to miss her dressing too. So thank God for Mother Ely, who's passed on and going to be with the Lord. But from a spiritual standpoint, and we're talking about African Americans and the church, we know as Black people, we have been through so much, from coming here in this country in chains and enduring hardships. And even when we do achieve success, it doesn't come easy, right? So there's a lot of barriers that we have to overcome, and we're still overcoming a lot of barriers as we speak. Tell us how the church has been a spiritual uplifting, just in the natural, where we can lay our burdens down, quote unquote, at the altar.
Yeah, I think there are three things that are critical. And depending on, even as the Black church is not monolithic. And what I mean by that, Dr. Claville, is that, in the Black church, we have varied spiritual experiences.
Absolutely.
So I recognize that everyone's spiritual experience in the Black church is not identical to mine. As I share mine, I don't mean to impose upon someone else's, but I can say that for me, I gave my heart to Christ in the church. So the beginning of my walk with God was in the church. I was on the first row in the youth choir with navy blue pants and a white shirt on a hot Sunday, August of 1968, the day I gave my heart to Christ and began my journey as a believer. So there's that aspect that we, let's say lay our burdens down. I laid my burden of sin down. That happened for me.
Absolutely.
In church. There's the daily burdens that we carry, the weekly burdens, coming to church to worship, to sing, to cry out to God, shout, to dance, to rejoice. Enable me to lay that burden down as well, the burden that we carry, the burdens that my mother carried, the burdens that my grandmother carried, that my Aunt Josephine carried. We were able to lay those down. And then there's the burden of loneliness as an African American people, the burden of being shut out, not being able to join this group or that club or be in this or that. But church, I was a member. I was a part. So when I went to church, I laid down the burden of rejection. Yes. And the burden of loss, even the burden of being excluded as opposed to included, because at church I was included and I mattered and I was a part of something. And I felt that even as a child when I went to church. So the spiritual benefit is not just spiritual in terms of my experience with Christ, but spiritual for my emotions, for my sense of social connection. All of those things precipitated out of my time in the Black church. It made all the difference in the world for me.
Absolutely. Right now, you're listening to Save the Water here on WNSB. We're talking about the Black church. This is our story. This is our song. WNSB is partnered in conjunction with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, WHRO TV, and PBS, and debuting and having conversations about the Henry Louis Gates Sr. documentary, The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song, which debuts on February 16th and 17th. Right now, we're talking with Bishop Courtney McBath, who is the bishop here in Norfolk of Calvary Revival Church. Bishop, you mentioned the spiritual aspect of the church and laying your spiritual burdens down, your sin burdens. But I want to go a little deeper into the natural burdens. Again, a lot of times our churches are very, what we call expressive. I had, I remember my grandmother was CME, and I had some relatives who were Catholic. As a matter of fact, I'm from Louisiana, where we have the largest concentration of African-American Catholics in the country. Some friends were AME, some were traditional Baptists, but even in all those churches, it was somewhere it was fairly expressive where you could shout, you could scream out, if you had a hot song in Terran service or a congregational song or a hymn, you could do it. And you can do that at other churches, but it was something about our churches where you could do that. And speak to that aspect of how our churches have been an opportunity for our people to come and really lay those earthly burdens down.
It's amazing that you mentioned this, Dr. Claville, because there is something about us as African-American folks that makes our church experiences very similar, from Roman Catholic to Baptist to Methodist to Episcopalian to Pentecostal to holiness. We all have this sense of expression, and we all have this connection to a love for being able to sing and share what's in our hearts. Now, that goes all the way back to slavery, and then prior to, even in our existence in the continent of Africa, the idea for us has always been that if a religion is real, there should be some expression of that in us. You ought to feel something. You ought to sense something. So we carried that into our African American Roman Catholic churches, our African American Episcopalian churches, our African American Baptist churches, Methodist. So in many ways, our churches across denominational lines are more congruous and synonymous than our white counterparts churches are when they're in the same denomination.
Absolutely.
But there's something that we carry in our hearts. It's what I believe kept us through slavery and through oppression and through Jim Crowism and through the recent events where our nation has reared its ugly head of racism once again. I believe what has carried us is our heart to express our love to God. And in the Black church, we gave people an opportunity to be able to find expression, which I believe saved our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned the things that were going on just in the past. Gosh, it hasn't been even a year yet, since we saw the all of the uprisings and the protests about real issues happening. Social justice. We mentioned George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on and on and on, and other things that we're still discovering, to this day. And the church, and I want to go back pre, 2020, if I can. Let's look at the 50s and the 60s, right? And how, where we started the civil rights, what we call the modern civil rights movement, the role that the church played in that time period. You look out, of course, one of the major forces in that we recognize today is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, of course, was a phenomenal preacher in his own right. If for our audience can go back and take a look at some of those sermons, listen to some of those sermons that he preached. He was a phenomenal orator, knew the word, and just a great giver of the word in our Black church tradition of preaching. But also we see other ministers that were with him. And of course, we know that Dr. King gave his last speech, the mountaintop at Mason Temple Church of God in Christ headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee. Tell us how the Black church itself has really played a major role in social justice then and also now.
Well, it's apparent to us, especially 40s, 50s, and 60s, we really didn't have anywhere to go except to our churches. We were not welcome in political parties. We were not welcome where the movers and the shakers, predominantly white male settings. We weren't welcome there. The one place we had was the church. And there we had influence. There we had finances and resources. There we had real estate. We could meet when we wanted to because those buildings belonged to us. And very seldom was that ever the case. But God in his providence, the sovereign God, had designed it so that as a people, we would have something and somewhere out of which we could then have meetings, voter registration, just to kind of counteract the misinformation that we'd been subject to since the 1600s. The church became that place where we could find real education, where we could understand how this country operated and how anti-African American it was, but not just discuss it, but come up with solutions, strategic planning. And so Dr. Abernathy, Dr. King, the list goes on and on. Reverend Jackson, John Lewis, Rosa Parks, the list goes on and on.
Exactly.
People whose foundation was in the church, but not just because they believed the Bible, but also because the church afforded us the opportunity to experience the rights that white Americans had everywhere. Church was the only place where we had freedom of speech. And in that place, we could strategize about our liberation and our emancipation and how to work that out. So I don't believe we could have done what we did without the church for reasons even beyond our faith, which of course I believe is important, but beyond that, there was opportunity for expression, for strategy, for meetings, for information to be distributed to folks. And from that, we could get it to everyone from the church. Because if you wasn't in church, your mama was in church.
That's right.
Your cousin was in church. We could get information to everyone from the church.
You know, you mentioned the buildings, the economic part. And, you know, we know that social justice is important. You know, the spiritual part of our lives is important. But there's also the economic side. You know, you can't go through this life unless you have the funds and the means to facilitate your life. And you mentioned the church. We had ownership of those buildings. And also, not just that, but we talked about the food. Many times when we didn't have opportunity to start businesses, we sold plates, sold food to people to raise money and things of that nature. Tell us about how the Black church itself is and was and still is a major economic driver of the Black community.
Well, again, it's the issue of opportunity. Because organization becomes the key to power. And so the church gave us an opportunity to organize. So we could organize Black businesses. We could organize Black banks. We could organize Black insurance companies. We could do all of that out of the church. And then we could even meet there and have an office there, somehow connected there, get the word out from there. So the church became significant. Father Divine with a major hotel and hotels, and Daddy Grace with major restaurants. Basically, the church became restaurants. All these things out of the Black church experience, because here was the opportunity to organize, put our money together, and then support those who looked like us, who went to church with us, who were in fellowship with us, or were in Sister Susie May's family.
Right.
And we were able then to connect with those folks. And so and then the ability then to have some training in economics and finance so that people understood what to do with their money, what not to do with their money, how to involve their money in ways where our communities could grow. And finally, then the ability to withhold our money from those things that were anti our emancipation, anti our liberation. Hence the bus boycott.
Right.
They didn't make adjustments because they liked us. They made adjustments because that money dried up.
That's right.
From folks deciding to walk to work instead of taking that bus, and those dimes and nickels after a while started to add up and placed a stranglehold on their Jim Crow system.
That's right.
And so the church gave us that opportunity.
You mentioned, again, the economics. I just want to take a look at how we have not just evolved from selling dinners and, like you said, creating our insurance companies, of course, funeral homes, barbershops, beauty shops, the repair service, everything we had in the church, but also how the church has taken those principles and built economic generators within the church itself. We look at mega ministries like TDJ's comes to mind, other ministries across the country. We look at what West Angeles Church of God in Christ is doing on the West Coast, other churches on the East Coast here in the Midwest and so forth here in Hampton Roads. I mean, so that provides an example of what you can do, when you come together, educate your people on those principles that you mentioned. I mean, so those are phenomenal principles that you're giving us. I don't know if you plan to teach another sermon, but you've pretty much just done that right now. But look, that tends to happen, right?
It happens.
Well, Bishop, we got a few more minutes left, but I want to talk about this last aspect of the Black church just for a moment. The music. The music is our way of expressing ourselves. I always like to say that American music is really African American music with a white face. And in many instances, we've created jazz, we created country, rock and roll, we created gospel music, and the like. just in a few moments, tell us what the music means to you and to the church itself.
For me, the music is critical because it's worship to God. So it means a lot for personal reasons. Sometimes I can't get to a message without referring to a song, whether it's a new song or an old song. So it's critical to me personally. In the church, however, the music carried us. The music carried us through the slave fields and Jim Crowism. The music carried us. And then the music has released some of the greatest industries and then the opportunity for economics that the world has ever known. You think of the folks who came out of the church. So we're not just talking about church music, but we're talking about the music, the finances, the record labels, the opportunities to this day that exist because somebody in the church learned about music and learned how to put music together, and then from that learned to write it and develop lyrics, and they learned those things. So there's a measure of creativity that's been released into our community that originally came from the church. So it's not just that church music and worship music has made a huge impact. We have then created other forms of music that have made an impact. And if we can refuse to allow white America to simply use our talent, make money for themselves, and give us just the pennies on every dollar, and develop our own as we have, but if we can continue to see that, then there's huge economic value as well from the creativity that's come out of the worship experience of the African American church.
Absolutely. Bishop Courtney McBath, thank you so much for joining us in this discussion here on State of the Water. You're actually coming back, so you'll be back with us next Sunday as we have a panel discussion about the documentary itself. Again, WNSB has partnered in conjunction with Corporation for Public Broadcasting, WHRO TV, and PBS in debuting The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song, the documentary by Huey Lewis Gates Sr. Bishop McBath, thank you so much. God bless you. We'll see you next Sunday. All right. We thank you so much for joining us here on State of the Water. We're going to take a commercial break. And on our way back, we're going to talk about the Trump acquittal trial. Where do we go from here? We want to get your thoughts. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. We'll see you after this commercial break.
State of the Water is supported by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, presenting The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. February 16th and 17th at 9 p.m. on PBS, airing on WHRO TV 15. Valentine's weekend is here. Hi, this is Mike Love from Love After Dark. Join me this Sunday for my 6-year anniversary show. We're going to take it back and slow it down with all your favorite R&B love songs from artists like Maxwell, D'Angelo, Teddy Pendergrass, SWV, and Tony Terry. And of course, I'll be making my love dedications to all my beautiful Valentines out there. I'm going to give it to you just the way you like, baby. Nobody does it like Mike Love on Love After Dark. Tune in this Sunday on Blazing Hot 91.
Welcome back to Save the Water. We just finished talking about the Black Church. This is our story. This is our song with Bishop Courtney McBath from Claville Revival Church here in Norfolk, Virginia. Join us next Sunday as we also talk about in a panel discussion of the Black Church, and Bishop Courtney McBath will join us again. But now, I want to discuss and talk about the Trump trial, or what we call the acquittal. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here in America? Where do we go from here to where we can be the nation that we always thought we could be? But I want to hear from you. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. What are your thoughts about what took place? What are your thoughts about what happened during the trial itself? Do you believe that justice was served? We want to hear from you. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. You know, we've been following this trial itself for a while, and we've been following the president for a while. But what happened on yesterday? I really want to delve into it and get your thoughts. because that's what this show is about. It's about your opinion, bringing these current issues to you, movers and shakers or policymakers to discuss issues that are important to you. But right now, we have a special guest on our line who's a friend to Save the Water and WNSB. His name is Joseph Brooks. He is the executive director here for advancement for the United Way of Southampton Roads. Mr. Brooks, good to see you. Good to have you again here on Save the Water. Mr. Brooks, we're going to get him on in just a second. But he's coming on to let us know about these important issues that are going on and what the United Way has going on themselves. But again, we want to hear what you have to say about this acquittal. But before we do, let's see if we can get Executive Brooks here. Are you on the line? Are you on the line? All right, we're going to see if we can get him here. Well, Executive Brooks? All right, so what we'll do, we'll come back and ensure to see if we can get him back on the line because, again, he's a friend. He's a friend to us, a friend to WNSB and Save the Water. Again, he's going to tell us about what the United Way actually has going on, for the community. They host a lot of these community efforts here in the community, and it's a phenomenal thing that he has going on. But again, I want to find out, again, this is the second impeachment trial, for our former president. And again, we say second impeachment trial. No president has been impeached twice, right? No president has been impeached twice. He's the only one who's been impeached twice. And I don't have to tell you what took place on January 6th here in this country. But again, I want you to think about it. But see if we have Joseph Brooks on the line. Executive Brooks, do you have you on the line? All right. We're going to get that fixed for him, but we're going to have him definitely here for us and make that announcement toward the end of the show just to see. They host great events, the United Way of Southampton Roads. So we're definitely going to get that announcement. We want you to join them as they, have these phenomenal events. But again, let's talk about this impeachment. Let's talk about this impeachment. So this is the second impeachment trial of our former president. The charges in this particular trial was that he incited the riot. Okay? So we know what took place on January 6th. They call it a riot. I call it mob violence because that's exactly what it was, mob violence. An officer was killed, and they showed additional footage of him being drugged down, right? Officers being drugged down the stairs, being bludgeoned with hockey sticks, being bludgeoned with pipes and the like. Being spit on, black officers being called the N-word. This was a sad day in America, and we were here. We were here talking about.
Hello.
Hey, right now, well, it looks like we got Executive Director Brooks online. Are you there? Joe, are you there? Is it Joe? Are you there? All right. So, like I said, we'll do our very best to get him on at the very end of the show. So, at this particular trial, now again, I want to go back to the first trial itself. The first trial was about him coercing a foreign country in order to create a false trial against now President Joe Biden, right? A false investigation to investigate him, to investigate his son, Bo Biden. Well, no, Bo actually passed away, his other son. Because of a quote-unquote computer. That, again, there was no validity to it whatsoever. But he said, if you do not hold back, if you do not do this investigation, I'm going to hold back hundreds of $millions in funds, military funds, to stop the Russia from coming in and also doing damage to Ukraine and even possibly Western Europe. Well, we had it on tape. We had all the evidence. But on party line, our elected officials voted not to convict that president. I remember Susan Collins saying, hey, this is, I think he's learned his lesson. I think it was Murkowski. They said, I think he's learned his lesson. He won't do this again. Right? Well, did he do it again? Absolutely. Absolutely, he did it again. But he was acquitted that time. Once he was acquitted, he hit the ground running once again. He hit the ground once again in causing ruckus, in causing confusion, and spreading lies. All right. That's the evidence. It was out there. So now we have this second impeachment trial. Where now, because he was upset about losing, because they had these lies that were going back and forth about the election being stolen, he created this rally on January 6th. And thousands of people traveled to Washington, D.C. First, they stopped at the White House for a rally. The rally itself, in order to hype people up, in order to get people moving toward the Capitol, to get them there, in order to hype them up, in order to, quote unquote, stop the steal. To stop the steal, which, again, it was no steal. And then once he got him hyped up, now he spoke to them, his son spoke to him, Rudy Giuliani spoke to him, I think the CEO of My Pillow spoke to them, other people spoke to him saying, we got evidence. But now, lack of evidence, where's it at? We still don't have it. The federal courts themselves have said, no, this is not going to happen. There's no evidence here. They have pleadings. They have lawsuits that are saying there were misspelled words in it being filed. That's an embarrassment to the profession, the legal profession. I'm just going to say that. As a lawyer myself, that's embarrassing to the legal profession. False allegations, using the court to push these false allegations, these lies. It's terrible. Absolutely terrible. And then on top of that, what has happened is that now that you have a lawsuit for basically malpractice, slander, being liable. Joe, are you there? Being liable for things that are going on. So now, what takes place? Joe, are you there? Well, it looks like we have a caller. Oh, the caller. We'll get the caller back. We'll get the caller back in just a moment. And bear with us. We're just having a little trouble here with our phone line. Caller, you on the air. This is Stay the Water. Wow. Caller. All right. We'll definitely work with that. We've got our producers working extremely hard on this right now. So now we have this issue. They come to the Capitol and they kill officers. They trash. They destroy our Capitol, desecrate our Capitol. And now we have evidence that's shown by managers that show that this is what's happening. It's unfortunate. And there was some other footage that was shown. Now, we've never seen this footage before. I've never seen it. And when I saw the footage, it was so heart-wrenching. It was so compelling. I thought for sure they'll vote to convict the president. But they showed just moments literally moments before the violent mob got to the Senate, where Vice President Pence was there. And they also showed his Secret Service security that was holding one of 3 footballs. Now, those footballs are what we have. The president has one, the vice president has one, and I believe one at the Pentagon. The top general has one. But this is to ensure the safety of our country, right? So now you have these people who are trespassing that have committed violent acts, and moments, literally moments before attacking the vice president of the United States. They go there, and thank God for Officer Goodman, who received a standing ovation, who was also given the honor to escort the vice president of the United States there. You know, we have a lot of these officers that deserve our hand. They deserve our any accolade we can give. We need to give it to them. The Capitol Police, they undermanned, no instructions whatsoever, left out there to fend for themselves. Those individuals deserve, all of the accolades that we can give them, right? So with that being the case, Officer Goodman literally saved pretty much our republic, along with the other Capitol Police, and definitely saved the life of the vice president and his family. Now, think about this. The family of the vice president thought that it was safer on that day for his family to be with him than to be at home in the vice president residence. That tells you something about what he probably thought and knew that could have happened. But then he goes there, and we saw the photo of the video of Mitt Romney, Senator Romney, going one way, sees the mob, and literally turns it around and runs back the opposite direction in fear of his life. Then we see officers being drugged down steps. We see officers, and unfortunately one officer was killed. Officers fighting back and forth saying, we need another unit, we need more units, we're overrun. And then right before one participant in the violent mob jumped through a window to get to members of Congress where they were, Secret Service had to take them down. And I saw the tactical police give them a thumbs up, saying that they were down. This is what our country has come to. The world saw this, and the world was watching. But instead of convicting this president for 3 hours, a 3-hour defense, and I want you to go back and take a look at the 3 days of presentation by the impeachment managers presenting their case. They did a phenomenal job. Again, as a trial lawyer, they did a phenomenal job, I'm telling you. The evidence was indisputable. The evidence was indefensible. They did a phenomenal job. Do we have a caller? Is there a caller on air? So then, from that time period, you have the president's defense give this conspiracy-filled opening, which caused another U.S. senator from my home state, Bill Cassidy, to do an about-face and say, look, this is wrong. I don't know what they were doing.
No, I hear something.
Hey, I don't know what they were doing. And then he voted to convict. He voted to convict. One of seven senators, Republican senators, 10 short, but one of 7 that we had, right? So now there's a vote on party lines. They go back over it, go back over the case. They read the indictment itself, the impeachment of the president from the House. The indictment walked over to the Senate. Then they take a roll call vote. There were reports that some senators turned away when they were watching, when the video was shown. There were some reports that senators had their feet on the desk when the video was shown, ignoring what was taking place. Even Ted Cruz and several other U.S. senators visiting the defense team. Now, they're jurors, but they're visiting the defense team. I don't know how that works, but visiting the defense team that's there. And what's happening is that they give this 3-hour defense, which was, again, indefensible, irrefutable evidence. But they voted on party lines. Then Mitch McConnell gives this speech to say, oh, we know the president was morally responsible. Right? Oh, we know the president actually did this. Well, what did you do about it? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. They voted to acquit. Even though the evidence fit, even though the evidence itself showed the president did exactly what he said he did. Now, one of the arguments were, oh, well, he actually didn't do it. He said go peacefully, but he also told him to fight. He also told him, you got to go support. You got to go. And then he tweeted support Pence. And after Pence said he couldn't do it, overturn the election, he tweeted, Pence let us down. I tell you what was most disheartening to me about this. What was most disheartening is that these violent mobsters created a hanging noose. Now, as an African American in this country, as black people, we know that the noose itself has a significant meaning. Lynching. And they held a noose. They created a noose saying, hang Mike Pence. They were looking for Mike Pence. They were looking for Nancy Pelosi. And these people walked in, stole artifacts from the Capitol, broke glass, desecrated our Capitol, and they just walked out. Nobody was shot. Nobody was killed, right? From the deceptive person who came into the door. But those individuals walked out like it was nothing. And now they're getting these knocks by the FBI on the door, and now they regret it. You better believe you regret it. Well, if you get a knock by the FBI coming to your door for something you did, of course you're going to regret it, but you were still wrong. But also what's happening in these trials, in these hearings, they're being let go. They're being able to travel out of the country. They're, people are saying, oh, I'll vouch for them. You don't have to lock them up. And that's another issue for another day. But to me, that's disturbing. We also talk about the security and the pleas for Black Lives Matter as opposed to this. Again, topic for another day, but we'll deal with it. So they vote to acquit. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? The world is watching. Do extremists feel emboldened now? Here you got a president that clearly incited the riot, even though some say it was free speech, but clearly you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's incitement. Clearly you can't tell somebody, hey, you ought to, kill yourself or do this. We've seen that where people were now held responsible for that, right? Can't do that. You can't do it. But here, our elected officials in our country said it was okay. And those that stood up, the 7 that stood up, they're getting rebukes from their own party back home. Right? Bill Cassidy, when he spoke up and spoke against the defense team and said how poorly they did, immediately he got rebukes from the Republican Party back home in Louisiana. Liz Cheney got censored out of Wyoming. Other people who stood and said the right thing and did the right thing are now being held accountable unreasonably, wrongly, I believe, by their own party back home. But they're standing up doing the right thing. Again, this is very, very disturbing on many levels. Of course, we have somebody like, again, we go back to someone who clearly would have been convicted in the Senate, which was Richard Nixon, but he resigned. He did the right thing. But it seemed like it was a different time then. It seemed like people respected democracy more and the process as opposed to not. As opposed to not. What's happening? You know, just because the rules don't work for you doesn't mean that you have to go and destroy the country. You work, you run for office, you present your case. There's enough people behind you to get you elected to office, enough people in Congress to help you pass that bill. That's the way things happen. It's the democratic process. It is the democratic process. And that's the process that we want to change. If you don't agree, right? But we shouldn't change it. The democratic process works, and we have to fight to preserve it. We got to fight to preserve it. You know, so again, as we move forward, where do we go from here? The world is watching. The world, our extremists are watching. Because keep in mind, we're experiencing something in the country that is just not unique to the United States as it relates to extremism, but we see it happening across the world. Extremism. You have extremism happening. A lot of this extremism happening in countries against people of color. You're seeing guns being used, mass shootings. We can take a look here in the country. We see what happened in South Carolina at the AME church in South Carolina. We see what happened at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. We see what happened at our schools, our elementary school in Sandy Hook, our school in Florida. You know, it's something that's brewing, right? We see persons in authority take it upon themselves to not execute the law fairly and equity, but taking justice in their own hands and executing citizens. We saw it with George Floyd. We saw it with Breonna Taylor. We saw it, and we see it all the time. So this extremism is something that's happening, but we've got to do something about it. Because if we don't preserve our democracy, if we don't just preserve America, who's going to do it? Keep in mind, from a historical standpoint, empires are not destroyed from outside. They're destroyed from within. Because people stop believing in the country and what it stands for. People stop believing in the republic. People stop believing in their real life. People stop believing that they actually have something that they can themselves live with and produce a productive life. So what do? Well, as African Americans, we do what we've always done. We continue to push, we continue to fight, we continue to show what is the right thing to do, right? We continue to be the example in the country of when you're held down, when you don't have everything that you need, you continue to move forward and overcome. I always say that there's nothing more American than being African American. Nothing more American than being African American. African Americans have shown perseverance. We've shown love. We've shown that we can overcome anything that comes our way. And we got to continue to show ourselves and show the world the exact same thing. This is not a time to fret. This is not a time to tuck tail and run. This is not a time where we forget about the great things that our country is about. But this is a time where we dig our heels in, a time where we move forward, and a time where we can show America and the world just how great we are. This is it. This is what we have to do. This is exactly where we have to move And it's exactly the process that we have to go through. Again, we want to thank you for joining us for Stay the Water. Thank you for joining us for the discussion about the Black church. This is our story. This is our song. And we will be back. I want you to tune in this February 16th and 17th to view the documentary by Huey Lewis Gates Jr. The Black church, this is our story. This is our song. And WNSB has partnered with, in conjunction with Corporation for Public Broadcasting, along with WHRO TV and PBS, in order to have discussions about this. And join us next week as we discuss it with a panel. And this week, we want you to go to the United Way of Southampton Road's website and view the program that they have that's being hosted by the African American Leadership Council under the direction of Executive Director Joseph Brooks. Until next time, be well, and we'll see you next week.